This evidence-based project is on the topic of hospital-acquired pressure ulcers. The healthcare issue that I chose to research was pressure ulcers from inpatient admissions. In case you don't know what a pressure ulcer is, it's an injury to the skin and potentially the underlying tissue when the area of skin has been placed under constant pressure for a period of time. There's lots of different contributors, but some of the main ones are immobility, pressure, friction, and shear. Since the vast majority of us work in healthcare, I think it's important to recognize why pressure ulcers are so important. As many of you already know, hospital-acquired pressure injuries are both costly and deadly. An interesting fact is a single pressure ulcer can cost anywhere from $500 to $150,000. Approximately 2.5 million patients have pressure ulcers that are acquired from inpatient stays every year. This can lead to $11 billion going to pressure ulcers in the healthcare system. I chose to address the issue of hospital-acquired pressure ulcers because the more I looked into it, it's really just one of those things that's unfortunately looked over, and it's a really easily preventable complication. It's costing hospitals billions. It's also prolonging hospital stays and inhibiting patient comfort. We have all of the resources available to prevent pressure ulcers. It's just a matter of patients and staff being educated on how to adequately use those resources. Since we already know that pressure ulcers are an injury to the skin and potentially the underlying tissue, this is just a little bit more about the staging and what they look like. For my PICO question, I wanted to figure out if in hospitalized patients, do sacral foam applications compared to no sacral foam applications reduce the risk of hospital-acquired pressure ulcers? My population was hospitalized patients. My intervention was a sacral foam. Comparison was compared to no sacral foam, and the outcome was hopefully to reduce the risk of hospital-acquired pressure ulcers. As far as finding my data to prove that sacral foams do work in preventing pressure ulcers, I used a couple different databases. My include and exclude criteria are there for you. The studies that I chose were all quantitative data. They examined the interventions of application versus no application of sacral foams in order to prevent pressure ulcers. All 5 of the research articles did conclude that sacral foams effectively prevent sacral pressure ulcers. So this table shows my findings for my literature search. Of the 5 articles that I utilized that were all done within the past 5 years, there's a couple different areas that were examined across these studies. Some of them included patients with hip fractures. Other ones were very broad-based. Some were in the ICU. All the information is there for you. The overall conclusion was that there was a significant reduction in hospital-acquired pressure ulcers when we were utilizing sacral foams. So this slide goes over my literature synthesis. It has a lot of the same information as the table before. It's just a little bit shorter. So to go over it with you real quick, HAPU 2017 examined patients 18 years and older who were hospitalized for greater than 5 days. This study was done between 2010 and 2015. These studies found that with the adoption of sacral foams, there was a significant reduction in hospital-acquired pressure ulcers. Quarry 2018 reviewed 327 patients 65 years and older with hip fractures. According to this study, only 4.5% of those with sacral foams developed pressure ulcers. Those without were at a 15.4% rate of pressure ulcers. Coloris, Messina, and Lee 2016 reviewed 366 patients and concluded that the incidence of pressure injuries was significantly less with a foam dressing on the sacrum. Byrne 2016 reviewed 3 different ICUs, and the research concluded that sacral dressings could decrease pressure injury rate by 3.4 to 7.6 per 1,000 patient days. And finally, Lee 2019 reviewed 471 patients and concluded that silicone foam dressings had resulted in a 72.5% reduction in pressure injuries. All of the studies examined a control group, and they concluded that their experimental group had much lower rates of pressure injuries because they had that sacral foam on. Also, all of these studies had different conditions, different units, different kind of patients with comorbidities, and different lengths of stay. But across the board, sacral dressings do reduce the incidence of hospital-acquired pressure ulcers. I chose to utilize quantitative studies because they can be easily reproduced. As you can see, I could find a lot of information on pressure ulcer reduction via sacral foams. These studies were constantly repeated to see if the results were the same, and they were. Studies done in my articles were mainly focused on different populations, whether it be hip fractures, patients who were immobile and suffering from different conditions in the ICU. They were very strict populations. Quantitative data can be easily interpreted with the statistical analysis. A lot of the information I gave you were percents of whether sacral foams work or whether they don't work. And quantitative data can typically be very precise and reliable. So, from the research I gathered, sacral foams, we all have them in our supply closet, whether you work in the ICU, on a med-surg unit, whatever the case may be, we all have these available to us. So I'm not really recommending a change in practice. I'm more so recommending that we utilize the tools we have available to us. First off, if you work at LGH, you have the Braden scale. We are going to go over that, but I'm sure if you're a nursing major, you probably already know what this is. It's just a screen to look at high-risk individuals and their risk for skin breakdown. The main thing I got out of doing this research was that sacral foams are effective and they are available to us. We are just not adequately using them. So, as far as implementing the research that I've done, we're going to realize that we already do pretty much all of these things. But we're going to go over it. So, screenings. I'm sure if you're a nursing major, you do some kind of admission database, admission screenings, go over all this stuff. You do a daily assessment. In that assessment, I'm 99.9% sure that you do some type of screening for skin breakdown, and at LGH that would be the Braden score. I'm not sure what WellSpan or UPMC uses, but regardless. A screening should be done on all individuals to see if they're high risk or not, on admission as well as daily. In order to implement this, we have to educate our staff as well as our patients. We can do patient handouts, staff meetings, anything to get across the idea of pressure ulcers are costly, deadly, and they're not fun. I think it's always helpful to have that extra reminder. Nurses and aides are busy. I mean, all people in healthcare are busy. But sometimes we just need that little reminder to document it, to do it, to make sure it's in place. Currently, we don't have any reminders, at least via Epic and LGH, that, hey, this person is high risk for skin breakdown, besides the assessment that we're doing, but sometimes the number isn't always that blinking red light that we need. Overall, what I concluded is skincare is really important to promote overall well-being in patients, and this is something we need to be more proactive in preventing. For those of you who do not work on an inpatient unit at LGH, this is the Braden scale. The Braden scale predicts the risk of pressure ulcers / skin breakdown. It's based off of sensory perception, moisture, activity / mobility, nutrition, and friction and shear. So it just goes over, how well is this person eating? Is this person able to reposition themselves in bed or in the chair? Is this person up and mobile, walking around the unit, versus are they laying in bed all day in one position? It also looks at whether the person is, sweaty, wet, incontinent, those things that put us at risk for skin breakdown. According to Crowell and Chachon, 2012, the scale is rated in scientific journals as having the best sensitivity and specificity. Okay, so as far as implementing the potential issues, how to fix them, that's kind of why this study exists. We're already aware that pressure issues exist partly because nursing is not utilizing the screening scales properly. We're getting a low score on a Braden scale, and we're not really doing anything about it. We might think, hey, we should probably turn that patient every 2 hours, or, hey, we should put a sacral film on them, but we're not necessarily doing that. So we need to educate. We need to educate on proper screening. As far as a Braden scale, a lower score is this person is at really high risk for skin breakdown. Meanwhile, a higher score is this patient is probably okay to just, chill out in bed and position themselves. We need to educate on proper sacral foam implementation and documentation. Currently, there's no, alert saying this patient needs to have skin care bundles implemented to prevent skin breakdown. I think something like that would be really helpful. Give nursing staff a reminder, because sometimes things slip our mind. Sometimes we don't have enough staff. We need to make this a priority. Also, it's always important to educate patients. We need to let them know that this can prolong your stay. This can cost a lot of money. Pressure ulcers are not enjoyable things. They're painful. They're uncomfortable. Ideas to improve practice. I had already said documentation. Forcing us to document seems to make us do things as nurses. It's that extra little check to make sure you're doing this. Also, doctors can potentially order sacral foams for patients that they deem high risk. It's never a bad idea to have an extra set of eyes, just checking over. So, in conclusion, the things I recommend, nurses, use your screening tools. If you see that a patient scores and they're at really high risk for skin breakdown, please implement some kind of skincare bundle. We have so many resources available to us. Don't let your patients get a pressure ulcer. We have sacral foams. We have cap systems. We can turn patients every 2 hours. My research proves that applying sacral foams to the sacrum does reduce pressure injuries. I know the sacrum is a super, super high-risk area, and we can easily prevent this stuff. Pressure ulcers are costing hospitals billions of dollars and impairing patient care and comfort, also prolonging stays. We have the screening tools. We have the sacral foams. Research proves that applying sacral dressings reduce pressure ulcers. We just need to better utilize the resources we already have available to us, and we can be part of the statistics that are lowering pressure ulcers if we properly utilize our resources.